My name is Jason Gillam. This is my brother Mike, and we are going to talk about Samaurai WTF. Some of you have probably heard of this before. The project is actually, this is its 10th anniversary this year, so it's been around for quite a while. And what we're going to do is show a little bit about where the project has been in the past, and then where we are taking it now, and what our future plans are as well. We do have, I'm going to start off with some slides kind of going through where it was, and then Mike's going to jump in with some live demo-y stuff. Hopefully it all goes according to plan, and show you what it's doing now. So the Samaurai WTF stands for Web Testing Framework. I promise that's what it was when they came up. And we're in the process actually of changing this, because although it started off with this idea of, hey, let's put all of the tools, kind of like a Cali thing, right? Put all of the tools into one spot for doing web app testing. What's actually happened is over the years it's evolved into more of a teaching environment. So it's used very often for when we're teaching classes on web testing, because we actually include several vulnerable targets in the build. Okay, so this is these days, it is a virtual machine-based solution. You can bring it up. It's got targets already in there. It's got tools already in there. And you can play around with it and practice, so on and so forth. So it started in 2008. The big boss CEO of Secure Ideas, Kevin Johnson, he started the project because he was bored. So he didn't get his talk in at DEF CON or something like that. And then he started messing around with this idea. And then shortly after that, Justin Searle, he joined as well. And at the time, they were both working for InGuardians. So I don't know if any of you are ever familiar with InGuardians. That's where they were working at the time. Now, in its first iteration, it was a CD ISO. This was Kevin playing around with a tool called Remaster Sys, which I understand is basically Bash scripts or something like that. I've never used it. It had there were some cool ideas here. For one thing, we didn't have to install everything. Anybody wanted to use it didn't have to install everything themselves. Everything was inside of a distribution, which is pretty cool, right? That's what we want to do with these things. You could, because it was a live CD, you could put a CD, you remember the round things that you could put inside your computer? I can't do that anymore. It looked like this right here. You could slide it in there, boot up the computer, and you would have, it would just pop right up in front of you, and then you had an installation right on the desktop, and you can install the rest of it that way. So really cool. Usually works, especially if you're booting, if you can boot from a CD. Could also, because it's an ISO, you could also set it up to install off of a thumb drive, which is something they started doing later. And it was hosted on SourceForge. So, and you can still find up to version 3.0 on SourceForge as well. So that's out there. It's not a live CD out there anymore. It's a virtual machine, and I'll get to that next. There are some problems with building an ISO for a distribution like this. Maintenance is a bear. Can you just imagine if you have multiple people working on a project, but every time you make a change, you have to basically build a CD, right, and test it, make sure that's all working. So there were some issues with that. It also made it very difficult to kind of backtrack if you made a mistake on something. You've already written it to an ISO, and then you try to install. It's just a very lengthy process. Also consider that we're talking about a time frame when computers were slower than they are today, so it took even longer than you would expect to get through all of that. So the next step was, hey, there's got to be a better way. We moved to VMware. So there, for several years, Samaurai WTF was maintained as a VMware image. Lots of advantages there. For number one, you could snapshot things. So you could, go so far, try it out. Oh, that didn't work. Back up, restore from the previous snapshot. And that didn't take too long to do. So that was really good. We didn't have to build out an ISO each time. But it also had some other problems. So maintenance is still a bear, except this one has snapshots. And collaboration sucks, right? So we have 3, 4 people trying to work on this project at once. And the way this would happen is, because I was involved in these 3 or 4 people working on it, it would be like one person would say, I have possession of the VM right now, the gold version of it. I'm making some updates because I'm teaching a class in a few weeks, so no, you can't go and make any changes right now. And so we'd be, trying to coordinate all that. And if it's just 1 or 2 people, you might be able to make it work. Once you get to more than that, it just wasn't working. It was very difficult. And from here, what we did is we tried a few other solutions. So I played around with that, it was, a little over a year ago? Or was it 2 years ago? I can't remember. 2 years ago. I was playing around with Packer IO as one option. I had a Debian package, so you could hopefully, install that. But that had a lot of the same problems as building out an ISO, really, because you still had to go through this. Every time you made a change, you had to rebuild the entire thing. So that was problematic as well. And in the end, what we were looking for really is a way that we could collaborate on something with, change control, maybe something sort of like source control, and be able to easily rebuild an environment from scratch. That would be handy. So in the end, what we decided is this. And this is actually an idea that Mike started with, and very thankful for that. This has made things a lot easier. So now Samaurai WTF is in its own GitHub repository. And most of it is a collection of script files for setting things up, and a Vagrant file, right? And we'll go through exactly what that is, because I'm sure that a lot of some of you probably know what Vagrant is. Hands? People have used it? Okay, so maybe a quarter of the room at most. So Vagrant is basically, it's tied to either VirtualBox or VMware or whatever the provider is, and you have a script that says this is how to build this VM. And so you just basically, Mike's going to demonstrate this, but basically with a couple of quick commands, it just pulls everything you need and stands up the machine for you, and it has everything all installed and all ready to go, which is pretty awesome. Now, from testing to teaching. So we started, like I said, this was initially a testing environment we were going for. We want this to be more of a teaching environment. So one of the things that we have to maintain on here is our vulnerable targets. And we start running into issues if we try to put too many targets on there. It gets really hard to kind of manage which target's where, which port is a target on. Because what we're talking about here is vulnerable web applications. So some of you are probably familiar with WebGoat. We don't currently have WebGoat installed. But what we did is we installed several using Docker containers. Right? So this is kind of the new way of doing things. This is what I've been told. We have some hipster developers on our team now, so they told us Docker's the right thing to do, so that's what we did. Right. So we have Docker containers for several targets already built. So DVWA, Damn Vulnerable Web Application, the most recent version of that. We have Matilde 2, Juice Shop, and then these two at the bottom. If you've ever taken like a SANS class or any class that features Samaurai web testing framework, it probably goes through Dojo Basic and Dojo Scavenger. And so those are older applications. We include them to keep it complete, but also we're trying to improve on those a little bit as well. But these other ones at the top, so DVWA and Matilde, they're actually very similar in their style. So if you're familiar with the OWASP top 10, top vulnerabilities, and you just want to focus in on certain vulnerabilities, those two applications are a great way to do that. Okay, because they actually have a menu of here's OWASP top 10 number A1 injection flaws, and then it goes through a whole menu item of all the different types of injection flaws that are built into there that you can practice. They even have different difficulty levels on them as well. So from easy, there's no controls preventing the SQL injection from happening, to medium, where there's some controls in place. It won't be straightforward to do the injection, to difficult or impossible. Juice Shop is we'll show you that briefly. JuiceShop is actually really cool. It's my favorite vulnerable app right now. It's a full-blown app, so it's not a menu style of vulnerabilities. Instead, it's an actual like online store for buying juice, hence the term JuiceShop. And it's built as a modern application. So this is a node-based app. It's single page. Has a very modern feel to it. So it's not like all of these other ones here. They work for what we used to consider what I would call like traditional web application pen testing. So if you throw an automated tool at something, it's going to be able at one of those. It'll be able to find injection flaws and cross-site scripting flaws fairly easily. But if you try to do the same thing with JuiceShop, it might not find them because there's a lot more logic on the front end, on the browser side, which is what we're seeing a lot in applications these days. So JuiceShop is, if you're doing any web app pen testing, you should definitely look at JuiceShop and try to get yourself very familiar with how to do a test with that type of application. So I guess at this point we will switch over to demonstration stuff. So we're going to trade mics here because we only have one mic, and Mike needs a mic.
All right, can you hear me? Good. All right. We're going to exit out of presentation mode because that's not where the demo lives. All right. I'm going to start by hopping into the kind of live running Samaurai VM. This is from actually last night's training. So you got burp in there. Just done any web testing, that'll be familiar. The scrolling, by the way, is for presentation purposes. Normally, when it's on your machine, what I would suggest is full screen it. Bump the resolution and full screen it. But when you're projecting, that's sort of a different issue. So here we were doing some cross-site scripty type stuff. Targets are there. We got rid of, so KDE was the desktop environment for old up to 3 Samaurai. It was Ubuntu based, it was KDE. And so one of my frustrations with it that kind of led to this was it got big. It got really big. So I had thumb drives, I had a training class coming up, I built a new target and it bloated up my VM and I couldn't fit it on my thumb drives anymore. So I went and used the old version of it, and then after I got through that training class, I went home, got pissed off, and started ripping it apart and rebuilding it in Vagrant. So I cut a lot of that kind of desktop environment weight by going to, so this is OpenBox. It's got a menu. You right click for that. It's a lightweight kind of window manager. It's got a couple of utilities, but not a lot baked in other than what you're actually using. I guess that's kind of it about that part. These I actually bookmarked for last night's training class. They're not baked in, the bookmarks. But these will preload on the first time it comes up. These are browser extensions that are commonly used in our training classes, at least. You got Foxy Proxy there, Wapalizer, Retire.js. If I go on over to Matilde, gives you that sort of information, stuff that I commonly use actually on pen tests as well. It's all kind of nicely baked in. And then we got these Dockerized containers for the apps. So if we have current targets, future targets, anything that has a conflicting dependency, we have some level of segregation between them. That gives us a lot more flexibility with the targets. And this is nothing kind of too fancy or magical here. This is the environment, really. But it works well for its purpose. That's the Burp Suite Community Edition that's baked in, along with a Z-Attack proxy, the OWASP man-in-the-middle proxy. And if you ever lose track of what your targets are, you can always, you read that? Yeah. You can always cat out your Etsy hosts because they're there. So nothing too shocking or surprising there. Some of those were also customizations that I put in for last night's training class. They're not quite ready to be baked in yet, so they're not in the master repo. That's just the bottom two that I'm referring to. The other ones are there. So the way it works is there's an Nginx reverse proxy that takes incoming traffic, and then by host name it redirects it to the appropriate port on the Docker container that it belongs to. So pretty standard stuff, nothing too fancy. How does the whole thing fit together? Well, if we pop on over to the GitHub page over here, I think this might be a reasonable interface to view the code. So Vagrant is essentially a way of describing a virtual machine that you want. I guess is how I would put it.
Zoom that.
I am zooming. There we go. So there's a Vagrant file in the directory. When you run Vagrant commands from the command line, so it's a command line tool. When you run Vagrant commands from the command line, it looks in the current directory for a Vagrant file, and then it moves up to the parent directory and checks there if it didn't find one in the current directory, and so on. So you can be in any subdirectory working and still run your Vagrant commands. And it's Ruby syntax, because it's Ruby, actually. And it's really just sort of a set of configuration instructions. One of the things that sort of changed is our primary hypervisor that we're really targeting most of the time is VirtualBox at this point, which I personally, it's been good to me. VirtualBox has been good to me. VMware has not been very friendly to me. I gather from my colleagues that's the opposite of a lot of people's experience, but we find when we fire things up with Vagrant, it does tend to work particularly well in VirtualBox. And it's accessible. It's available on all the platforms, all the major desktop platforms. It's free, which is nice, right? You don't have to either run a demo of VMware Player or Workstation or pay for a license. Generally, Hyper-V would be a nice target as well, but Hyper-V, of course, is Windows only, so generally that kind of pulls things together nicely. There we go. And so it's got stuff describing the VM. It's got some VirtualBox-specific instructions there to open the GUI, otherwise it would be headless mode. It's got a name for it, it's got memory allocation, etc. And then down below that, it calls a bunch of provisioning stuff. And there's really not.
Black out for a second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There's someone from the stream that mentioned it, and then so much for 15 hours in battery from this.
You cursed it.
Yeah, something.
So,
Hold on a second.
I can sing a song while we wait.
Yeah.
Make sure the last part of the intro into the
He asked
battery
about where they
cover
last heard it. Okay, say something. I think we should be.
Something.
Okay. Yeah.
Something else?
What?
Say something else.
Say-
Something
yeah,
else.
I see the audio.
Is that good? Bad? Good? Bad?
I'm
Louder?
asking on the screen when it cut out.
Really repeat everything for the last
Not the whole
45
I can do it, and I will.
Go back maybe a couple slides worth.
That maybe helps if someone needs something.
A couple of slides
Okay,
We're in
good.
live demo mode
Thank you.
Hold on.
Use your best judgment.
Okay. So welcome back, everybody, on the live stream. So we went to GitHub. We opened up the Vagrant file in GitHub. I'm going to leave this up because nicely, if you look at the very top right now, you can actually see where the Git repo is. I think we have that on a later info slide as well. I'm seeing a head shake over here. So that's there. It's actually, it's nicely indexed by things that like do search indexing and stuff. So it should be findable if you use anything that's not Bing. That was a cheap shot. That's not fair. All right. So yeah, Vagrant file, it describes a VM. For like, in this case, VirtualBox is the main provider we target, although there's nothing fundamentally wrong with using this to target VMware. Vagrant can do that, or Hyper-V, as long as the base box supports it. And the particular base box on this one right now is it's a Bento, which is managed by Chef, which is another orchestration tool. I'm seeing some head shaking, yes. I get that a lot, actually, in the office. Somebody will throw out a random word, and I'll say, yeah, there's a tool called that. It's sort of a running joke with Kevin. So it's kind of a vanilla Debian box that we build everything up on top of. And you see there's a shared folder there. It has the VirtualBox guest editions baked in. Usually that works. Sometimes there can be version mismatches that cause problems, and currently we're kind of manually dealing with that, but long term we'll be looking to automate that part of the solution. So if we go down into our some VirtualBox specific options, the name to bring up a GUI instead of going in headless, and then we have provisioning scripts below that, bash scripts that are run on the VM when it is built, when it first comes up, to provision it. There's an odd naming convention to them, probably because I'm unconventional. But so there are, if you scroll down further, what's actually happened here is, I gotta zoom out to unscroll. What I've done is I've set up multiple different VMs. One of them is a default. There we go. All right. Everybody motion sick now? Good. So there are multiple, there are actually a couple of different builds of the VM that call only a subset of the provisioning scripts. And then there's the main default one that calls all of them. And essentially that's broken down into just a target server, which I would caution is not tested very often. Although you can always raise an issue on GitHub and get a fix from us pretty quickly, or directions on how to fix it yourself is probably more likely. And then you can submit a pull request, which would be awesome. But also it's helpful for us. If I'm trying to do something with a target, I don't want to rebuild the whole machine every time, because some of those provisioning scripts also like update packages and stuff. It can take a while. For me, somewhere around 5 minutes probably, which is still a much faster way to do iterative builds, but it's not super, super fast. To sort of solve that, I've broken it down. I've got a target server in there that calls those provisioning scripts. I've got a desktop environment that just does those, just the desktop, no targets, which allows for faster iterations when doing development work on it. And so it's essentially, it's the same layout as the one we just looked at, but calling a smaller subset. Instead of 4 provisioning scripts, there are 2 for the user environment. So that's your Vagrant file really in a nutshell. In terms of future direction for it, we have some ideas, some pretty, I think, somewhat ambitious ideas. At least I like to think they're ambitious. Such as having like a YAML config file that is, these are the tool sets and these are the targets that I want for this particular class. Generate this, give it to my class, and it will build it with just those particular bits in it. Possibly even taking that to the point of having an interactive kind of script when we run the Vagrant up command to say, well, you don't have a config file. Do you want all the targets or do you want to choose them? That sort of thing. Because it's Ruby. If we can figure out how to write that in Ruby, then it it should be possible to do. I believe people have done some work in that area. So
I don't know why you're looking at me.
what? Because that doesn't mean you won't write it. Okay. We'll zoom in a little bit here. We're not going to watch the whole build because, as I said, it takes several minutes. But I'm going to do a quick. So this is one I've renamed this machine, so it should show as a separate machine. Hopefully, this doesn't like explode or anything. But if there is something that's going to explode in live demo mode, it's going to be this. I'm going to move that magnifier out of the way because it's in the way. Run a Vagrant up command. So first thing it does is imports the base box. In my case, it's got that cached on my system because I've been using that base box. That looks bad. I have two of them kind of going at the same time. So that's probably what that is. But yeah.
That's VirtualBox complaining. That's not Vagrant.
That's because it didn't clean up properly last time when I tested building this box. But really, truly, if you run that command, it just kind of does its thing. It grabs that config file, it runs through it, it does the provisioning of the box, and then you end up with a GUI with a login. It's a text-based login. We didn't actually put a login manager on it. So it's just your standard Linux login, and then it will load into the desktop environment. And it's really that simple. When you're done, if you were successful in building it, which you will be, trust me, you will. Then Vagrant destroy, in this case, obviously it's saying that the other ones were not created. This one it says was. And you just, yes. And it should clean up correctly. And just take it out. It'll take it out of VirtualBox. What will still be on your system is that Debian base box. So next time you build it, it won't have to fetch that again. That's kind of it.
Unless you go back on the build now, it should work, right?
You know, we'll see. We'll see. I don't believe it will, because I believe I already did that. The fix when this happens, by the way, is to actually find where VirtualBox has put that machine and blow it away, which is not as difficult as it sounds, but I'm not going to do it right now. Yeah. So what are the provisioning scripts doing without going into incredible detail? Because really, you can go and look yourself if you want. So I've got this broken down into, I'm zooming, sort of stuff is grouped into two directories. There's the install directory, which is stuff to run. There's the config directory, which is random config files that I don't want to figure out how to generate on the fly, so I've just written them and included them in the repo. But also that way they're properly version controlled, and we can see when somebody changes a config and it breaks stuff. We have that kind of audit history on it. So quickly, what sort of stuff is in here? Well, yeah, this sort of stuff. So what OpenBox starts when it comes up. There's the definition for the menu that I got when I right-clicked. Some various scripts that are available to it. Somewhere in here, there it is, Nginx config for the reverse proxies. That sort of stuff is grouped in under here. And now that you know it's there, you can actually go and pick it up and do stuff to it and make it better and submit a pull request, because that would be awesome. There is, so the install stuff is those provisioning scripts that you saw, doing various different things. I'm not going to walk through each of them because that's going to get dry and boring really fast. But you can see here stuff like setting the host name. So some of this is a little more on the kind of Linux-y technical side. I'll look for something that's a little bit less so. Yeah. Yeah. So some of this is just stuff like installing Chrome, for example. simple package install type stuff. Java runtime, there you go. So WP scan also uses Docker. It's the way that we fetch it. There are other ways. That sort of thing. Yeah. Pretty simple stuff, just bash script fetching stuff. If you're familiar with the Linux environment, none of this would be challenging for you to write yourself, but you don't have to because it's here. That's kind of the bulk of it. This was so that's the user environment one. The targets one, and the reason I want to point out the targets one is because I want people to add targets. I think that'd be great if people would add targets. So there's the target bootstrap here. So our teammate Corey, who's floating around the conference somewhere. Oh, there he is. There. He's our Docker hipster. So he's done the DVWA and Matilda ones. He's pulled in the Docker wrappers for them. So fetching them at this point is just pulling the Docker images, which he's nicely indicated with some echo statements there. Juice Shop is from Bjorn Kiminich, who is the project manager, basically, as an OWASP project. He's also by far the main contributor to it and doesn't sleep and does 5 new builds a day. And as far as I can tell, is a cyborg or something. But it's a fantastic target environment, as Jason said. And then there's the really kind of sketchy Samaurai Dojo stuff that might or might not have my name on it. Where so it's a wrapper that has the original maintained project as a sub repo, Git sub repo. So it pulls that from its original source and then wraps it up in Docker and builds a container kind of on the fly. So there are different ways of solving different problems there. But that's really all there is to actually the whole thing. It's scripts for building. Currently, yeah, scripts for building it, config files, a Vagrant file, which is really a config file written in Ruby.
Someone on the internet was asking, are there any window targets?
Windows environment, like Windows containers, Windows operating system?
The question is, any window targets, question mark. So
I'm going to take that as a yes. Windows servers. Currently, there are not. If there is a particular one out there already floating around that we can pull in, that'd be great. Otherwise, when we write it, we'll, Which one? Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. If you have requests like that, features, ideas, we'd love to hear them. Head on over to the GitHub and open an issue.
That create a licensing issue, though?
Not if the targets are licensed in a way that is shareable. It's not a commercial product.
No, I meant if it was a Windows.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, we'd have to figure out licensing for it, which currently it's not a path we've started down. I can see the appeal of it. It makes a lot of sense, considering the number of environments we test that are mostly Windows servers, right?
Can we run .NET on Linux?
Of course you can. They got Core now. The question was, can you run .NET on Linux?
why?
That would.
You're supposed to repeat the question.
Yes.
I'm not. All right. Sure. So my teammate Alex is going to come over and do a Vagrant up. Ooh, we're going to see if it breaks twice or redeems itself.
Yeah,
this could go either way.
Earlier. Discussed it before.
You gotta stand close.
Oh yeah, if you want him to be heard, he's gonna have the mic.
I'm gonna.
Hey, don't go yet. It's not on the screen.
All right.
Are you plugging into the HDMI?
Yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah. There's
Not arch problems.
so he's furiously typing in a dark room with code projected onto his face.
All right. So we're we're currently in the Samurai WTF folder right now, and we're gonna just do Vagrant up. So that you guys see it. There it is.
1, 2, 3, and
Still important.
if you don't have the Debian image, it actually goes and fetches it. One thing to watch with the Bento ones, although they're actually, so HashiCorp is the company that does Vagrant. They do some commercial tools for infrastructure as code type stuff. One thing, they recommend using the Bento ones for like Ubuntu and stuff, but one thing to watch is Debian 9.4 is a separate base box. So if that's changed in my Vagrant file for Samaurai and I go into a Vagrant up, I'm going to end up with 2 base boxes sitting on my system and probably want to go and clean up the old one that I'm not using anymore. Unfortunately, in that case, it's not really automated. If a Vagrant box with the same name is updated, you get prompted to download the update if you want to. So they're, as long as it maintains the same name, it's sort of version controlled, but not if they rename it like they do for that particular project. On the your right, stage right side of the screen, there's it's opened up. So this is sitting on a command line. The machine has actually come up, but it's still doing a whole bunch of provisioning. You get to that part, don't mess with this window. Just kind of leave it there. People will try to log in right away because they've got a login prompt. So it looks interactive, is not really ready to go. It will restart at the end, and when it restarts, it will actually have the Samaurai WTF host name. That's how you know that it's done. Or by watching your output window doing your Vagrant stuff. So that's just happily running away. I saw Docker Community Edition just got installed there.
It's not bad stuff.
That red stuff's not bad.
It's most likely just warnings.
Something is fetched through a wget and it outputs in red, I think is one of the big ones that gives you a big block of red. It's not necessarily errors. There can be errors. Some of them are okay, but that's not one of them. Yeah, so that's really kind of.
We need to talk about what other things we want to do with it.
Well, what else do we want to do with it?
Different provisioning.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, in terms of kind of future direction, better support for some of the other provisioners would be great. That's something we would like to do better. Hyper-V stands out because people that run Hyper-V can't also run VirtualBox at the same time. So making them disable their one hypervisor and install VirtualBox to do a training class sucks, right? It's obviously something that would be better not to have. Packer is something that we're looking at again. It's matured quite a bit, which would allow us basically to maintain a Vagrant base box for Samaurai. So instead of it doing all of this updating and build steps, it would have a base box as a starting point that's got everything installed. I like the idea of maintaining both kind of at the same time, not because I like more work, but because I like the transparency of starting with a clean Debian build and seeing everything that's being put into it and what's being run and what's being changed. As a user, as a somewhat security paranoid user, you would probably like the opportunity to see that in some cases. So there's that.
You're writing it in Python?
No. Rewriting it in Python, no. I'm not going to rewrite Vagrant. it's already in Ruby until they migrate it to Go, which they haven't announced they're going to do, but it's a Ruby project, so it's probably a safe bet. Yeah, so adding in mobile support for mobile training targets and mobile tooling would be definitely on the roadmap sooner rather than later. Somehow I made myself the guy who gets tagged with a lot of the mobile stuff at work, so it just makes sense for me to shove that in there too. I don't know why. I think it started with me rooting a device, and then suddenly I'm the guy who does that stuff. So the moral there is don't do stuff that you don't want to continue doing. Find someone to pawn it off to, because otherwise you're a victim of your own success, or the way my dad always puts it is the reward for good work is more work. Which my wife would say I subscribe to by sucking at things like doing the dishes.
More targets.
More targets, and the targets there are definitely open issues. They're open issues in GitHub for several other targets, Node Goat, Rails Goat, basically a whole bunch of goat ones.
Herd of goats.
A whole herd of goats. And there might be a few others in there currently, but again, if you have a target in mind, first of all, you can open an issue, right? And say, hey, I'd like to see this in there too. It's a side project, but when we get the chance, we'll put it in. Or you can do it yourself. Submit a pull request, because that'd be really cool. So there's a project we would like more input. We're kind of, as long as it's just mainly the two of us working on it, we've got Alex looking at the Packer options as well. As long as it's mainly our little group looking at it, we don't have that outside perspective, and we welcome it. So it'd be great to have other people throw in ideas, input. If I shoot down your idea, it doesn't mean I don't like your idea. But the idea of Dockerizing the targets came out of a conversation while running a training class at a BSides event like this one. Somebody in the class said, have you thought about doing this? And then Kevin was there and he was like, I'm not really comfortable with Docker. I think he gives pretty honest answers. And at the time, that was his feeling. He's getting comfortable with Docker. Or at least with delegating Docker work. So, question over here?
Are there any update utility scripts inside the VM, or you pretty much have to destroy and re-update?
Vagrant provision.
Yeah, you could
A lot of stuff pulling different Docker images in and things like that. You're scripting a lot on the front end. Is that updatable with inside?
Usually what I would do is destroy and recreate. You could get onto the command line and run your usual Docker commands.
Right.
Yeah,
But it's not built in code.
but it's not. No, there's no sort of automatic updating.
Did you just do like a git pull any changes and then vagrant provision?
Yeah, that's likely to work. It might also throw some errors for stuff already being there. It's not necessarily going to be graceful, but it should more or less work. So the suggestion over there was, do a git pull and then do a vagrant provision, which will rerun the provisioning scripts on the existing VM.
The nice thing about Vagrant is it's meant to be destroyed again.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be recreatable.
Yeah, Vagrant kind of came about as a development tool. I'm running my development version of my app, I'm running my development server on my machine, and I want to be able to just destroy and rebuild it at will. Which is why my kind of attitude, and I think in general our attitude is usually we want to blow it away, and that's a lot of red.
That's done now.
Okay. Usually we want to blow it away and rebuild it. And I do that for pretty much every training class I teach. When I set up the class VM, and then generally export it and stick it on thumb drives for anybody who doesn't have the VM, that doesn't have the Vagrant build on their machine. But I will say, one of the best training classes I did, instead of in terms of not having technical issues, was the one where we sent out a message a week in advance and said, hey, everybody go get this and run Vagrant up. And we had a class full of people show up with working target environments right from the start of the class. That rarely happens. For anyone who's taught a class, in the first hour, you're going to be going around troubleshooting people's issues on their machines a little bit. So that was, to me, that was sort of the proof that if we do it this way and we are vigilant about kind of testing regularly and going through the process, that we can hand it out to a training class and see it work really well. Your colors are weird.
That's because it's tunneled over SSH and VNC.
It's because it's tunneled over SSH and VNC. Okay.
Yes, it's working.
Yeah. So. VNC seems like.
Tiny. That's okay.
Something.
So yeah, there's a terminal up. The environment is up at this point. So that gives you a little bit of an idea how long it takes to do a fresh
That's
build.
a smaller, slower machine too. It builds faster on that.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, it worked.
Sorry, you're a professional heckler. Sorry.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Questions?
Let's move on to questions. Questions? I know we've kind of been answering them on the fly, but we're around. If you have any ideas, questions come up later.
Sorry, for targets, do you just want to set things that are local to the box, or do you want the target host file to also be able to reach out to, like things like hack yourself first by Question.
It's not something we've discussed, going to external targets. I wouldn't say it's off the table as at least an option, but
Most of our focus has been on internal targets because when we're going to teach a class somewhere, we don't necessarily know for sure do we have internet.
yeah.
Or how good is it?
Yeah, I just didn't know if there's something you wanted to
Yeah.
build into it for anybody that takes it home and tests it.
But absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
as a
I think that's a good. I think it's a good idea to have that sort of as an option as well.
Yeah. So open a GitHub issue, and maybe think about submitting a pull request.
The mic around, please.
I'm going to stand a little closer to the middle so that we
Any
can
other questions?
share.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I know you use Retire.js inside of Chrome as an extension, but is that only because, the Burp Community Edition is that loading it as an extension? Is it basically Retire.js? Is there any reason to use it inside of Chrome when you also have it inside of Burp as a plugin?
I like doing both. When I pen test, I run Burp on my native machine. I have it installed there as well as a plugin. In the VM, I don't think we know of a way to automate the installation of Burp extensions. So we'd have to take the students through manually installing it for them to have it. Whereas with Chrome, I have it set up so that it actually fetches and installs it when it first launches.
Yeah, I was talking about real world testing. There's what benefits you see between Retire.js inside of extension.
So, for me, I actually prefer to have it inside a Burp.
It's got link. Yeah.
I prefer running it inside of Burp for the reason that even if I navigate away, the information is captured in history, right? So it's always there as passive results inside of Burp. Whereas inside your browser, you have to actually be looking at the page that has the problem in order to be able to see the results.
Yeah, I usually don't load up Retire.js as an extension. I just didn't know if there was some benefit to it as opposed to just
No. It doesn't cost anything, so.
Well, it's Chrome. It always costs something. Yeah, I think as far as I'm concerned, it comes down to preference. And I do both.
Question?
So assuming you get as far as it's on the screen right now, if this is something you aren't doing every day like y'all do, what would you recommend as a ho-ho test to say, yeah, you actually did it right?
As a test, so the question was, as a test of the environment, once it's up to the state that it is on the screen, how do you know? What do you do as sort of a smoke test that it's up and working? I would open Burp, because you're going to need it, and I would open at least one of the targets in the browser. You could iterate through all of them. Definitely, if you know you're going after a specific target, it's an obvious choice. You're going to test that target. But those are kind of the main things, making sure the targets came up, making sure your tools are there. If you've got that, you're pretty much good to go. Yeah. So there is how the targets come up, just because it's a sort of a point of interest if you do encounter any issues. There's a bash script sitting in a hidden /.scripts folder off of the Samaurai user's home. Inside of that, so there's that bash script that's set up on a cron job. So if that hasn't worked,
You know it?
Not offhand.
it's
Yeah.
I think it's startuptargets.sh.
We're out of time right now. We're getting the cue to get off stage. So, but we'll be around. We'll step out into the lobby if anybody has any other questions about this. Just approach us there. So.
Or open an issue on GitHub.
Or yes. Thank you.
Since you already have the other piece, I just gave you this.